Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what a wonderful note on which to rise to speak today, to see the paragraph that I was initially so pleased to see in the unanimous consent motion that the government would implement measures without delay. So much improved through our unanimous work again. I want to thank the NDP for taking the lead in making sure that benefits are going to people for whom there were gaps. Clearly, the Minister for Employment and the Cabinet Minister of Finance have been working hard to try to address gaps. Before I get too far into discussing what we've done here today and what we've been doing as parliamentarians, I do want to pause and thank, and on behalf of the Green Party of Canada, all of the essential workers in this country. The frontline workers, particularly those in the healthcare professions, our doctors, our nurses, our first responders, and our personal care workers who go into senior homes. There are so many people right now without whom we couldn't self-isolate in safety. We couldn't practice our social distancing without truck drivers who made sure there was food on the shelves, the people in our grocery stores who make sure that the shelves are stocked. The efforts that have been made to stop hoarding, to make sure that we look out for each other. But essential workers in this context include some people that we often don't stop to celebrate. They tend to be those people who are lower paid workers. And in this moment of deep gratitude, I just want to express on behalf, I think, of all of us again, our gratitude. And it's particularly concerning that we not allow these people to be unprotected. The term PPE, which is now at the tip of our tongues, personal protective equipment, wasn't something we talked about. We should have learned the lessons from SARS. We can always look back and say, and I worked with Sheila Basra. I love Sheila Basra. The SARS work and the commissions at the time warned us and told us that we would need to be ready for another pandemic and that we shouldn't let these supplies run low. I'm not going to do a blame game. It's human nature. The farther we got away from the SARS pandemic, the less we went to check how much is stored in our shelves. Do we have enough N95 masks? Do we have enough gowns and gloves? Are we protecting our frontline workers enough? We still have a crisis. There are still places and people and hospitals and senior care homes that are crying out for this protective equipment, and they're crying out as we gather here. I thank them for what they're doing. We do it every day at home. I get out on my balcony I'm on 2nd Street in Sydney, and all around me, it's when I know my neighbors are still home. You can hear them banging on pots and pans. The streets of my community, Sydney by the Sea, are empty. But at 7 p.m., there are people in the marina blowing their boat horns, and we bang our pots and pans. So I just want to say to all those healthcare workers across Canada, we all want to thank you. I also want to thank my caucus members. I would split my time if I could, but the honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith is in Nanaimo Ladysmith. The honourable member for Fredericton is in Fredericton. She is still self-isolating from her last trip to Ottawa, and New Brunswick rules require she stay put. The honourable member from Nanaimo Ladysmith wasn't able to make the trip. I'm enormously grateful to be here, and while I'm expressing gratitude, I want to thank the Honourable Minister for Employment for giving me a lift. And I also have to thank the Leader of the Official Opposition, because I think it was more or less his plane. But it's a new term for me. We plane pooled. We stopped in, was a Fredericton to Victoria to Regina. It's not a regularly scheduled thing. And I'm glad that Jill and the kids could come along too. It was a family event as we made our way here, and I'm so grateful because I booked all my commercial flights. And I have to say, I mean, I know everybody, I feel so privileged and so grateful because, I mean, it's a special position to be able to know a government plane is going to pick you up. I didn't expect it. And I have to say, I was kind of semi-terrified about the transits I was going to make through 4 airports. So I have a lot of reasons for being grateful right now. And with that, I want to move on to talking about this legislation. We are working hard as MPs. I know every single member of government is working hard, and I want to also include in that the civil servants. I've never before, I mean, I'm used to working 7 days a week, but I'm not used to getting an email back from staff at the civil servant level of the Western Diversification Office when I write about a routine grant that has a 30-day window, because people are working at home. Civil servants too, thank you. I know you're working Saturdays and Sundays because you answer my emails on Saturdays and Sundays. This is an extraordinary time. But I wish, and I'm not sure how others in this place will feel about it, but I do want to say publicly, I think we're eventually going to need the Emergencies Act. I know the Premier said no. I think we're eventually going to wish we'd had it in place. The public welfare portion of the Emergencies Act, it's not the War Measures Act of old. I read it for the first time a couple weeks ago and thought, this is what legislation to deal with an emergency looks like when it's not written by people in the middle of an emergency. So it's thoughtful. It doesn't suspend our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It doesn't send the Army in anywhere, and it respects provincial jurisdiction and the use of provincial police forces. But I'll just give you one example that's on my heart right now, which is that the community I represent, Saanich Gulf Islands, the Gulf Islands are being inundated with visitors who are coming in by ferry, and even though BC Ferries says don't come unless your trip is essential, these small communities are really feeling it. The grocery store shelves empty out with people from urban areas coming to visit. I know it's happening in cottage country. I'm sure the Muskokas are experiencing the same thing. Get out of the city and go to your cottage. But the healthcare systems and services in these more remote and rural communities can't handle the kind of inundation of people that's happening now. So I just want to flag with my colleagues here, the way the Emergencies Act works, it can be invoked, doesn't need new legislation, it can be invoked by Governor and Council, but when Parliament is in recess, it must be recalled within 7 days to discuss and debate it. So in an ideal world, just as a precaution, I would have liked us to discuss it and debate it today while we're here, so we have it in our back pocket if we need it, because I'm not certain that at some point in the coming weeks, we won't wish we had it, to make sure that we had a national priority system for distribution of ventilators and N95 masks, that we didn't have the capacity to say we need to stop people from going into these smaller communities that can't handle an influx of population right now. But that brings us to the bill we do have in front of us. And I think it is time to think about transformational change. The honourable member from Rosemont-La Petite Patrie was pointing this out a moment ago. We're doing things now in real time so fast that, those of us who've been parliamentarians for a while would not have been able to imagine that government could roll out these programs so fast. It's an extraordinary tribute to hard work, thinking outside the box, being liberated from some constraints, because the pandemic of COVID-19 is a bigger threat than anything we faced in short term. I do make the parenthetical comment that the climate crisis is still a larger threat to human civilization than this pandemic. But this has caused civil servants, ministers, and opposition members to think in different ways. This has caused my conservative friends, like the member for Carleton, on conference calls we've had, to be the voice that says, what about the small credit unions? What about helping those small credit unions, not just the big ones? And I thought to myself, you shouldn't ever make assumptions about people. I didn't think that was something the member for Carleton would say, but sure enough, concern for all of us and the basic needs of all has risen to the top. As I said earlier today, this experience has shown us that life is more important than money. La vie est plus importante.
Life is more important than money. It's fundamental in a culture that we always think about the economy and protecting it.
Our economy, we have to rebuild our economy, but not at the cost of human lives. So we know what's important. In looking at this, I hope that we can agree at some point that a guaranteed livable income is what the country needs. As other members have mentioned, in normal times, not everybody can pay their bills. In normal times, kids who should be able to go to university can't afford it. In normal times, too many people fall between the cracks. We can fix those cracks. We can fix those gaps. And the Green Party of Canada has, from way before I was involved with it, stood for a guaranteed livable income. On doit avoir.
There has to be a guaranteed living income for a level of subsidy where everyone can live sustainably.
Hope we will come back to. For now, what we have first in C13 went quite far towards looking at gaps, but recognized that they remained. And that's why we're back for C14. I'm pleased to see the wage subsidy increase to 75%. I'm pleased to see the tweaking around definitions of what's an eligible employee to make sure we didn't accidentally create a one-day mistake. I'm pleased to see the changes around eligible entity and, of course, around the qualifying periods. This makes the whole program much more accessible to more companies, employers who are able to give that wage subsidy. But it doesn't deal with every situation, not even still. If there's one thing that trying to come up with legislation to meet every circumstance and fill every gap the way we're doing it, one thing it shows is one size won't fit all. Even when we're talking about senior homes, I received an email today from Meadow Lane. It's a seniors home on Salt Spring Island, but it's run as an independent living facility. So it's not within the health authorities, but it has additional costs, and it's a not-for-profit society, so how do they handle these additional costs? They're not one of the ones that has deep pockets. Obviously, the costs are going up. The workers are stretched. They need to buy more masks, more gowns. They don't have a revenue reduction because people are still in the homes, right? So not every circumstance is fitted yet to our best efforts in this place. Similarly, I've talked to businesses that are venture capital businesses. They've got their venture capital. They're on the verge of a breakthrough. But the BDC venture capital model isn't working for them because their venture capital comes from firms that aren't in the recognized group from within the BDC plan. We need some flexibility there too. We need to be able to say, if you're on the verge of really taking off in your business, we shouldn't be restricting where you get your money. Now, speaking of money, I did want to pick up on a point made by the Honourable Member for Burnaby South earlier today, which is the banks. The Minister of Finance has clearly been exerting maximum diplomacy on the banks, getting them to say, okay, we'll let you have longer to pay on your mortgage. But the six big banks are misusing his good faith. I'll put it that way. They're not so profitable for nothing. Last year's profit of the six big banks in Canada came to $46 billion. It's 10 years in a row now that they make more money year on year than they made the year before. Well, we can see why. They're saying to people, well, you don't have to pay your mortgage for a while, but when you pay it, we're going to get you. This is not Team Canada. This is not the spirit we want to see. I think it's about time that the large banks were taxed at a level. We tax our big banks less than other countries in the G7. Why? I guess we like them. I'm not sure they like us. I would love to see the Minister of Finance convene by conference call all the country's credit unions and ask, what are you capable of doing? What would you be able to do to help the small businesses in this country avoid bankruptcy? What would you be able to do to get the money up front that wasn't a loan so they could pay their rent so they don't go under? The fixed costs of businesses. I mean, I grew up in my family business as a kid, and through my 20s, I waitressed and cooked in my family restaurant on the Cabot Trail, which was a seasonal business. I think about what would happen now, thinking about my parents. If this had hit us then, I don't know what we would have done. We would have had 35 seasonal employees we couldn't hire. We would have been wondering, do we open or not? what the heck do we do with all the things we have to pay for no matter what? That's what I'm hearing from businesses in my riding now. Someone called me the other day. Well, the email he sent just about broke my heart. He said, described himself, and I won't give any details, well, nothing biographical, but he said, I'm a 250-pound man. I'm covered in tattoos. And this morning I went to the bathroom and shut the door so my kids wouldn't hear me crying. He's got businesses, and plural, that can't open right now, and no way to pay the rent on them. All of his life savings, he's already indebted. Small business is going to need more than what we've got here. Now, I'm encouraged because the unanimous consent motion does speak to short-term support measures for Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises that will be partially non-refundable. I think we have to work on how much is part. We have to do way more. If we want to get out of this, which we do as a country with businesses that run in the black, we can't let them go into, they won't go into deeper debt. I know they won't. They're already telling me, if I take a $40,000 loan without interest, I won't be able to pay it back. And then I'll go bankrupt later. This is a real concern, and it's coming from the heart. There are other issues that matter to us across this country. We know one size doesn't fit all in any category. But I do want to, before my time is elapsed, thank everyone in the government and the provincial governments, and particularly our public health officers, from Dr. Teresa Tam to Dr. Bonnie Henry in BC and back again across this country, Dr. Strang in Nova Scotia. I mean, these guys, they're now our daily friends on TV. We see them more than we see, oh, I don't know, who did we used to watch on TV? We now know who we can look to for advice. We can look to those public civil servants whose job is public health. And I'm enormously grateful to all of them because I think, as every Canadian has witnessed, they are also working round the clock. Maintenant, c'est clair que nous avons...
It's now clear that we're in an extraordinary situation. We have to come up with solutions together. We need to continue working together. We need to look for ways to work as members of Parliament in a virtual Parliament. I'm not sure how that is even possible, but clearly the impossible is now becoming possible.
Completely impossible. I mentioned earlier the fact that Doug Ford says the Deputy Prime Minister is his therapist. These kinds of things would not have been considered possible a short time ago. So we need to work together. On behalf of the Green Party caucus, you have my word that we will do whatever we can. We have been forwarding advice, complaints, ideas, worries, and I have to say, when we forwarded them to a listening ear. And for that, we're grateful. We need to be, in this crisis, which does not at this point have a clear end in sight, able to say to every one of our constituents, every Canadian, and permanent residents, and the foreign students, I'm very worried for them. Anyone right now, we want you to know, if you're living in Canada, we've got your back. And if you feel that no one is there for you right now, don't worry. Reach out to us. Tell us what you need. We'll fight for you. Merci mille fois.
Thank you. Comments, questions et commentaires.